This is the surface of Charon, the largest moon of Pluto, an icy world drifting in darkness nearly 6 billion kilometers away from us. Here there is no separate atmosphere to hold on to anything, no heat source to warm the crust, no single stream of energy strong enough to make matter move or change. Sunlight reaching here is about 1,000 times fainter than on Earth, so weak that noon on Charon is still darker than the gloomiest evening you have ever stood in. Surface temperatures drop to around minus 387 to minus 369 degrees Fahrenheit, more than 250 degrees colder than anywhere ever measured on our planet. In that cold, the very air you are breathing right now would freeze into snowflakes drifting lazily down to the ground. For nearly a century, books taught us that the moons on the edge of the solar system were nothing but dead lumps of ice, frozen motionless since the dawn of time, with nothing left to tell. Then the James Webb Space Telescope pointed at Charon, and it caught the signature of a chemical reaction happening right now, and what it found should not even exist on a dead world. Pluto has a total of 5 moons, of which Charon is the giant, a satellite nearly half the size of Pluto, followed by 4 tiny satellites named Styx, Nix, Kerberos, and Hydra. Charon orbits Pluto at a distance of less than 20,000 kilometers, so close it is hard to believe when you remember that our moon is nearly 400,000 kilometers away from Earth. And because Charon is so large compared to its parent planet, the common center of mass of the two objects does not lie inside Pluto but falls into the empty space between them, making them look as if they are orbiting an empty point floating in space. Charon itself is a bare water ice world, ancient, pockmarked with impact craters, about 750 miles wide, that is about 1,200 kilometers. What is worth noting is that for nearly the entire 20th century, we knew almost nothing about this place. Pluto was just a faint smear of light in the lens, a dot so small that even its size was only a guess, a world smaller than our moon, only about 2/3 as big. Then in 2015, the New Horizons spacecraft hurtled past the Pluto system at more than 30,000 miles per hour, in a single flyby, no orbit, no second chance. To get it that far out in a time frame humans still had the patience to wait for, engineers built a spacecraft weighing only about 1,000 pounds, then strapped it to an Atlas V rocket with 5 extra boosters, unleashing nearly 2 million pounds of thrust. New Horizons left Earth in such a hurry that only 9 hours later it had already passed the moon's orbit, about 10 times faster than the Apollo missions. On the way, it borrowed Jupiter's gravity like a slingshot to speed up, and even managed to photograph an erupting volcano on the moon Io, all just to reach a place that it turned out was not nearly as lonely as we thought. Because Pluto is not the largest object out there, it is only the brightest object in a vast region that scientists compare to the junkyard of the solar system, the Kuiper Belt, where Pluto happened to reflect enough light for us to see it first and then hastily assume it stood alone. And when New Horizons' lens finally captured Charon up close, what appeared was not a smooth, soulless ice ball, but enormous canyons tearing across the surface, deep chasms running through the ancient water ice layer riddled with the impact scars of billions of years. In a few short days, we saw the face of a world for the first time in history. Then the spacecraft flew on. It only managed to record one single series of images before plunging straight into the darkness behind Pluto and never returning. Anything it missed in that single flyby, we consider lost forever. And throughout all that time, the story science told about moons like Charon barely changed at all. Textbooks taught that the icy moons on the outer edge of the solar system were frozen fossils, inert masses of matter that had stopped living long ago, with no geological activity, no chemical reactions, lying motionless exactly as they had formed 4.5 billion years earlier. For nearly the entire 20th century, we viewed the entire region of space beyond Jupiter's orbit as a vast wasteland, a place of only gas, ice, and rock, too cold and too distant to bother with. Those tiny worlds were pushed down to a faint footnote at the end of the chapter, names to memorize and then forget, nothing more. They were the boring ending to a story everyone thought they already knew completely, but no one had ever really listened to what their surfaces were saying. The problem is that old story was wrong, but not because anyone lied, but because we never had tools good enough to listen. New Horizons only flew by once, and its instruments only read a narrow band of wavelengths, leaving blank a whole range of light where chemical secrets hid. But the biggest obstacle lay elsewhere. From Earth, Charon is always glued right next to the brilliant Pluto, and its faint signal is constantly drowned in the glare of its parent planet. Pluto is already small and distant, with a large moon right beside it, so separating the radiation of each object was nearly impossible with any telescope before. Then James Webb appeared, and for the first time in history, we had a device that could separate the two voices that had always overlapped to hear Charon's voice clearly on its own. With a mirror 6.5 meters wide and 2 infrared spectrometers Norspec and MIRI, the latter reading wavelengths from 4.9 to 27 microns, Webb was born to look into the coldest and faintest corners of the universe. In May of 2023, an international team led by Tanguy Bertrand pointed it at the Pluto system and did what no one had ever done before. They built an accurate model of Charon's thermal signal, then subtracted it from the data, cleanly separating the signatures of the two worlds that had always been stuck together. Through 4 observations with INYARSPEC in 2022 and 2023, Webb scanned the entire northern hemisphere of Charon, bringing back something no spacecraft had ever touched. And what Webb brought was not a new piece added to the old picture. It placed a question mark on the very foundation upon which that entire story was built, the assumption that these worlds had stopped functioning long ago. And the first thing Webb found was enough to make the scientists sit up straight. In a study led by Silvia Protopapa, published in the journal Nature Communications on the 1st of October 2024, the research team reported the first ever detection of carbon dioxide on Charon's icy surface. The ability to read wavelengths much longer than New Horizons' limits allowed NIRSPEC to see what the 2015 spacecraft had completely missed, and this carbon dioxide did not fall from the sky. Clues in the data show it was already inside beneath the crust in Charon's interior, then thrown up to the surface through impact events that punched through the ice layer and dredged material from deep inside out. Pause for a second to see the paradox here. A moon that should have been dead solid, a block of ice considered inert for 4.5 billion years, is now exposing before the lens materials taken from its own guts. The foundation of the old story began cracking right from this discovery. But this was only the beginning. Because of the 2 molecules Webb detected on Charon that time, carbon dioxide turned out to be the less shocking one. To understand why the second molecule shook everything, first look at what we already knew about Charon's surface before Webb spoke up. For many years, observations from the ground and from New Horizons had built a fairly solid chemical inventory for this moon. Its surface is mostly crystalline water ice, ancient ice as hard as granite in that terrible cold out there. Mixed in are compounds containing ammonia, and scattered everywhere are organic materials creating the characteristic gray and pale red hues covering Charon's face. It was a bare water ice world, exposed to cosmic radiation for billions of years, and for a long time, that inventory seemed complete. We thought we knew what Charon was made of. Then Webb extended the view to wavelengths no one had touched before, and an entirely new signature appeared in the data, something never recorded on this surface before. It was hydrogen peroxide, the same compound you still see in the bottle of hydrogen peroxide antiseptic at the pharmacy, but this time frozen solid on the surface of a moon 6 billion kilometers away. And its presence was not a harmless detail added to the list. It was a testimony. Because hydrogen peroxide does not naturally sit there from the time of formation. It is the product of an ongoing process. When light and high-energy radiation particles slam into the water ice molecules on Charon's surface, they break those molecules apart, and the fragments recombine into hydrogen peroxide. In other words, Charon's surface is being continuously cooked by radiation, every second, every minute, in a reaction that never stops. What Webb caught was not the remnant of an event long ended, but the fresh trace of something happening right now. And that was only half the story. In the same series of studies in 2024 and 2025, scientists also solved a mystery that had haunted them for decades, the mystery of 2 strange dark red regions on Charon, streaks darker than anywhere else on its white-gray face. It turned out that red color did not belong to Charon. It was stolen breath from Pluto. Pluto constantly leaks methane and other molecules from its thin atmosphere out into space, escaping the weak gravity not strong enough to hold them. Most of that escaped material seemed to vanish into nothingness, but it did not disappear. Charon is catching it. Those wandering methane molecules from Pluto drift to the giant moon next to it and settle onto its 2 frigid polar regions. There, under the faint sunlight and relentless cosmic radiation, methane is activated, reacts, and transforms into dark red organic compounds called tholins, exactly what dyes those 2 mysterious polar caps. New Horizons had suspected this when it saw the 2 red regions in 2015, but it had no way to prove it. Webb proved it. And when you put these 2 discoveries together, a picture emerges that makes the entire old story collapse. Charon is not a fossil lying still. It is a running chemical factory. On one side, radiation cooks its own water ice layer and keeps producing hydrogen peroxide. On the other side, it catches the leaking gas exhaust from its giant neighbor, then cooks that material itself into red hues on its 2 polar caps. This is the image of a world bleeding to feed a moon being dyed toxic, 2 objects entangled in a slow chemical exchange stretching over billions of years without ever resting. Nothing in it is silent. Nothing in it has ended. And this forces us to confront a question that shakes the very roots of the language we still use. We call those worlds out there dead, but what does that mean when in a place 6 billion kilometers from the sun, a place so dark and cold it defies all human experience, chemical reactions still happen, matter still moves, the surface keeps renewing itself nonstop? What we thought was death turns out to be motion too slow and too far for our eyes to catch. But if even the surfaces of these worlds will not lie still, then perhaps it is time to question the motion of the entire strange system itself and whether it is truly as quiet as we have always believed. To see how strange this system is, first recall a rule that anyone studying astronomical physics knows by heart. Almost every moon in the solar system is tidally locked with its parent planet, meaning they always show exactly one face toward the planet, permanently hiding the other side. Our moon is the most familiar example. Throughout all of human history, no one from Earth has ever seen its far side with the naked eye, because it always presents the same face toward us. That is order, that is stability, that is what gravity over time always imposes on moons. And the Pluto system takes that rule to an extreme unmatched anywhere else. Because here, not only is Charon tidally locked with Pluto, but Pluto is also tidally locked with Charon. The two worlds permanently face the same side toward each other, rotating in perfect synchrony, as if welded to the two ends of an invisible string. If you stand on the far side of Pluto, you will never see Charon even once in your lifetime. And if you stand on the near side, Charon will hang motionless in exactly one spot in the sky, never rising, never setting, never moving. That is the picture of absolute order, a stability locked in place to perfection. And then the four small moons shatter that picture completely. Outside Charon's orbit, the four tiny satellites named Styx, Nix, Kerberos, and Hydra, all named after figures tied to the underworld in mythology, do not obey any rule of stability. None of them is larger than about 35 kilometers, and instead of rotating steadily or showing the same face toward Pluto, they tumble in complete chaos. The reason lies in the Pluto-Charon pair itself. Because the system's center of mass lies in the empty space between the two large objects, the gravitational field the four small moons experience keeps shifting and jerking, never allowing them to settle into a fixed rotation rhythm. They roll from one end to the other, spinning and flipping along constantly changing axes, never showing the same face twice in a row. The specific numbers are even harder to believe. Hydra spins so fast that it completes 89 full rotations in just one orbit around Pluto. Nix tilts its axis to 132 degrees and rotates in the opposite direction from the rest of the entire system. If you stand on one of those four moons, there is no way to predict when the sun will rise, or even in which direction it will rise. Tomorrow it might come up where it set today. And this is what stuns scientists the most. No other moon system ever observed in the entire solar system behaves in such a chaotic way. What we thought was a locked, synchronized, quiet system turns out to contain inside it a mad, unpredictable dance. But the deepest question is not how they are moving, but where this entire bizarre system came from. For many years, the accepted explanation was a story of violence. People believed that in the dawn of time, Pluto and Charon slammed into each other in a violent collision, and somehow, instead of shattering or merging into one, they became stuck together in an orbital wrestling match, two rivals gripping each other tightly without letting go. That was the familiar image, a beginning born from destruction. Then in January of 2025, a study published in the journal Nature Geoscience, led by Adine Denton, rewrote that entire story. Her team pointed out that for decades, scientists had overlooked a key factor, the structural strength of rock and ice on small cold worlds like Pluto. When that factor was included in simulations, a completely new scenario emerged, a mechanism they call kiss and capture. Instead of smashing into each other and deforming like two drops of molten liquid, the ancient Pluto and Charon touched and stuck together, spinning around each other in a shape exactly like a cosmic snowman, before rotational forces slowly pulled them apart and locked them permanently into orbit around each other. What is astonishing is that in this scenario, both were almost undamaged. Charon retained its core and nearly its entire mantle, emerging from that encounter almost intact, and perhaps as ancient as Pluto itself. What we once imagined as a fatal crash turned out to be an unexpectedly gentle touch. They were not born from destruction, they were born from an embrace. Pause for a moment and reflect on our place in this entire story. For nearly a century, we looked at those worlds and called them ordinary, uninteresting, mere details to brush aside, to make room for greater things. And at every level we have looked, we have been wrong. We were wrong about their surfaces, which we thought were inert, but are constantly changing. We were wrong about their motions, which we thought were locked tight, but tumble in chaos. We were even wrong about how they were born, which we thought was violence, but was a light touch. When the New Horizons spacecraft flew past Pluto in 2015, Alan Stern, the mission leader, said the images sent back would haunt him for the rest of his life, haunted by the unexpected beauty, by geological forms no model had ever dared predict. That is the obsession of a person who has seen his own imagination surpassed by reality. And that leaves us with a question that is not at all comfortable. If we have been so deeply mistaken about the very closest and brightest objects in that entire region of space, the ones we could finally see up close, then how many more things are we still wrong about out there, in places we have never once looked at carefully? And that question is not at all abstract, because what came after the Pluto flyby only makes it more painful. After leaving the Pluto system, New Horizons continued plunging deeper into the Kuiper Belt, and on the first day of 2019, it flew past a small object named Arrokoth, a primordial ice body shaped exactly like a snowman, two lobes stuck together, almost untouched for 4.5 billion years since the solar system formed. And the story still does not end there. In June of 2026, the spacecraft just woke up from the longest hibernation in its entire journey, and the first signal sent back carried something worth pondering. Out there seemed to be more snowman-shaped objects like Arrokoth than anyone ever predicted, and the Kuiper Belt itself may be vastly larger and dustier than we previously imagined. Each time that spacecraft looks more closely, the region we once thought empty turns out to be crowded. And if you think what is happening in the Pluto system is just a strange exception, look at Triton, Neptune's large moon. Scientists believe Triton was not born there, but is a Kuiper Belt object captured by Neptune's gravity. In other words, it is a hometown sibling of Pluto. Yet Triton, a moon that should also be dead solid on that cold edge, is erupting cryovolcanoes, spewing a mixture of ice and gas onto its surface, wrapping itself in a thin nitrogen atmosphere, and even a hydrocarbon haze layer. Another world that should be silent, yet still active. And this is where everything opens up into something much larger. If even these moons, considered dead and ordinary, are operating so vigorously and strangely, then what is the enormous region of space containing them hiding? Because Pluto and its moons are only the objects that happen to be close enough and bright enough for us to examine in detail. Behind them, the Kuiper Belt stretches across a region hundreds of times larger than the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, containing hundreds of thousands of objects wider than 60 kilometers, along with an estimated 1 trillion icy comets. And even farther, the Oort cloud is believed to hold another trillion or so ice bodies, stretching out to nearly a quarter of the way to the nearest star. That outer region is not a silent void at all. It is a crowded graveyard so packed we cannot possibly count the bodies in it. And the scary part is that every single one of those bodies is quietly doing something. Every ice block drifting in the darkness may be cooking up its own chemistry, exchanging material with neighboring objects, spinning and flipping to rhythms no one has ever witnessed. We have only seen a few of the brightest, closest ones, and even that has been enough to overturn everything we thought we knew. The rest, those hundreds of trillions of worlds, still drift in darkness with no one watching. The universe out there is colder than anything you have ever felt, and darker than anything you have ever seen. But it is also far busier than what we dared to think. Slowly, quietly, on timescales that make all of human history seem tiny, it keeps doing things we have only just begun to glimpse. For nearly a century, we have slapped the label of dead on those worlds and then turned away. But that label has never been correct. Those worlds have never been dead. We just have not had the ability to see them moving. Right now, the James Webb Space Telescope still regularly returns to observe the Pluto system every few months, and the New Horizons spacecraft has just woken up at the far edge of the solar system, ready to send back a new batch of data. If you want to be there at the exact moment the next round of discovery is revealed, a round almost certain to be stranger than everything you have just heard, hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now.